the cucumber sandwiches cut for Lady Bracknell Lane?
Yes, sir.
Did you hear what I was playing?
No, sir, I didn't think it polite to listen.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. By the way, Lane, I see from your book that on Thursday night, when Lord Shoreham and Mr. Worthing were dining with me, 8 bottles of champagne are entered as having been consumed.
Yes, sir, 8 bottles and a pint.
Why is it that at a bachelor's establishment, the servants invariably drink the champagne? I ask merely for information.
I attribute it to the superior quality of the wine, sir. You see, in married households, the champagne is rarely of a first-rate brand.
Good heavens! Is marriage so demoralizing as that?
I believe it to be a pleasant state, sir. You see, I haven't had much experience of it up to the present. That is, only in consequence of a misunderstanding between myself and the young person.
I don't know that I'm much interested in your family life, Lane.
I'm not much interested in it either. I don't think of it often.
Very natural, I'm sure. The bell, Lane?
Yes, sir.
Lane's views on marriage seem somewhat lax. Really, if the lower orders don't set us a good example, what on earth is the use of them? They seem, as a class, to have no sense of their moral responsibility.
Mr. Earnest Worthing.
How do you do, my dear Earnest? What brings you up to town?
Oh, pleasure, pleasure. What else would bring one anywhere? Eating as usual, I see, Algy?
I believe it is customary in good society to take some slight refreshment at 5 o'clock. Where have you been since last Thursday?
Oh, in the country.
What on earth do you do there?
Well, when one is in town, one amuses oneself. When one is in the country, one amuses others. It's excessively boring.
And who are the people you amuse?
Oh, neighbours, neighbours.
Got nice neighbours in your part of Shropshire.
Oh, no, perfectly horrid. Never speak to any of them.
How excessively you must amuse them. By the way, Shropshire is your county.
Shropshire? Yes, of course. Hello. Why all the teacups? Why all these cucumber sandwiches? Who else is coming to tea?
I want Augusta and Gwendolen merely.
Oh, how perfectly delightful.
Yes, that is all very well, but I'm afraid Aunt Augusta won't quite approve of your being here.
May I ask why?
My dear fellow, the way you flirt with Gwendolen is perfectly disgraceful. It is almost as bad as the way Gwendolen flirts with you.
I am in love with Gwendolen. I have come up to town expressly to propose to her.
I thought you said you'd come up for pleasure. I call that business.
Oh, how utterly unromantic you are.
I really don't see anything romantic in proposing. It is very romantic to be in love, but there is nothing romantic about a definite proposal. Why, one may be accepted. One usually is, I believe, and then the excitement is all over. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. Please don't touch the cucumber sandwiches. They're ordered specially for Aunt Augusta.
Well, you have been eating them all the time.
That is quite a different matter. She is my aunt. Here, have some bread and butter instead. The bread and butter is for Gwendolen. Gwendolen is devoted to bread and butter.
And very good bread and butter it is, too.
Yes, my dear fellow, but you need not eat it as if you were going to eat it all. You behave as if you were married to her already. You are not married to her already, and I don't think you ever will be.
And why is that?
In the first place, girls never marry the men they flirt with. Girls don't think it right.
No, that's nonsense.
It isn't. It is a great truth. It accounts for the extraordinary number of bachelors that one sees all over town. In the second place, I don't give my consent.
Your consent?
My dear fellow, Gwendolen is my first cousin. Before I can allow you to marry her, you will have to clear up the whole question of Cecily.
Cecily? What on earth do you mean by that, Algy, by Cecily? I don't know anyone by the name of Cecily.
Lane, bring me that cigarette case Mr. Worthing left in the smoking room last time he dined here.
Yes, sir.
Do you mean to say that you've had my cigarette case all this time? I wish to goodness you would let me know. I've been writing frantic letters to Scotland Yard. I was nearly offering a large award.
I wish you would offer one. I happen to be more than usually hard up.
Well, there's no use in offering one now that it is found.
I think it rather mean of you, Ernest, I must say. However, it makes no matter, for now that I look at the inscription inside, I find that the thing isn't yours after all.
Of course it's mine. You see me with it 100 times, and you have no right whatsoever to read what is inside. It's a very ungentlemanly thing to do, to read inside a private cigarette case.
Yes, but this is not your cigarette case. This case is a present from someone of the name of Cecily. You said you don't know anyone of that name.
Well, if you must know, Cecily happens to be my aunt.
Your aunt?
Yes, charming old lady she is too. Lives at Tunbridge Wells.
Well, but if Cecily is your aunt who lives at Tunbridge Wells, why does she call herself Little? From little Cecily with her fondest love.
My dear fellow, what on earth is there in that? Some aunts are tall, some aunts are not tall. That is surely a matter an aunt can decide for herself. You seem to think that every aunt has to be exactly like your own. Now, for heaven's sake, give me back my cigarette case!
But why does your aunt call you her uncle? From little Cecily with her fondest love to her dear Uncle Jack. There is no objection, I admit, to an aunt being a small aunt. But why an aunt, no matter what her size may be, should call her own nephew her uncle, I can't quite make out. Besides, your name isn't Jack at all. It's Ernest.
It isn't Earnest. It's Jack.
You always told me it was Ernest. I've introduced you to everyone as Ernest. You look as if your name was Ernest. You are the most earnest-looking person I ever saw in my life. It's perfectly absurd you say your name isn't Ernest. Here it is on one of your cards. Mr. Ernest Worthing, B4, the Albany. I'll keep this as proof that your name is Ernest if ever you attempt to deny it to me, not to Gwendolen, not to anyone else.
Well, my name is Ernest in town and Jack in the country, and I acquired my cigarette case in the country.
But that does not account for the fact that your small Aunt Cecily, who lives at Tunbridge Wells, calls you her dear uncle. Now go on, tell me the whole thing. I may mention I have always suspected you of being a confirmed and secret Bunburyist, and I'm quite sure of it now.
Bunburyist? What on earth do you mean by a Bunburyist?
Well, I'll reveal to you the meaning of that incomparable expression as soon as you were kind enough to inform me why you were called Ernest in town and Jack in the country.
Well, produce my cigarette case first.
Here it is. Now, produce your explanation.
Well, the old Mr. Thomas Cardew, who adopted me when I was a little boy, made me in his will guardian to his granddaughter, Miss Cecily Cardew. Cecily, who addresses me as her uncle, from motives of respect you could not possibly appreciate, lives at my place in the country, under the charge of her admirable governess, Miss Prism.
Where is that place in the country, by the way?
Oh, I'm not going to tell you, and I can tell you candidly that the place is not in Shropshire.
Oh, I suspected that much, my dear fellow. I've Bunburied all over Shropshire on 2 separate occasions. Now go on, why are you called Ernest in town and Jack in the country?
Well, when one is placed in the position of guardian, one has to adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. It's one's duty to do so. And as a very high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce anything to either one's health or happiness, in order to get up to town, I have always pretended to have a younger brother of the name of Earnest, who lives in the Albany and gets into the most dreadful scrapes. There, my dear Algy, is the whole truth, pure and simple.
The truth is rarely pure, and never simple. What you are, my dear fellow, is a Bunburyist. You are one of the most advanced Bunburyists I know.
What on earth do you mean by that?
You have invented a very useful younger brother called Ernest, in order that you might come up to town as often as you like. I have invented an invaluable permanent invalid called Bunbury, in order that I might go down into the country whenever I choose. If it were not for Bunbury's extraordinary bad health, for instance, I'd be unable to dine with you at the Carlton tonight, for I've been really engaged to Aunt Augusta for more than a week.
I haven't asked you to dine with me anywhere tonight.
I know. You are absurdly careless about sending out invitations. It is very foolish of you. Nothing annoys people so much as not receiving invitations.
Well, you had better dine with your Aunt Augusta.
I have no intention of doing anything of the kind. To begin with, I dined there on Monday, and once a week is quite enough for dining with one's own relations. In the second place, whenever I do dine there, I'm always treated as a member of the family, sent down with either no woman at all, or 2. In the third place, I know perfectly well whom she will place me next to tonight. She will place me next to Mary Farquhar, who always flirts with her own husband across the dinner table. That is not very pleasant. Indeed, it is not even decent. And that sort of thing is enormously on the increase. The amount of women in London who flirt with their own husbands is perfectly scandalous. It looks so bad. It is simply washing one's clean linen in public. Besides, now that I know you're a confirmed Bunburyist, I naturally want to talk to you about Bunburying. I want to tell you the rules.
I'm not a Bunburyist at all. If Gwendolen accepts me, I'm going to kill my brother. Indeed, I'll kill him in any case. Cecily is a little too much interested in him. It's rather a bore. So I am going to get rid of him, and I strongly advise you to do the same with your with your invalid friend with the absurd name.
Nothing will induce me to part with Bunbury. And if you ever get married, which seems to be extremely problematic, you would be very glad to know Bunbury. A man who marries without knowing Bunbury has a very tedious time of it.
That's nonsense. If I marry a charming girl like Gwendolen, and she is the only girl I ever met in my life that I would marry, I surely do not want to know Bunbury.
Then your wife will. You don't seem to realize, my dear fellow, that in married life, 3 is company, 2 is none. Now, that must be Aunt Augusta. Now, if I can get her out of the way for 10 minutes so that you might have an opportunity of proposing to Gwendolen, may I dine with you tonight at the Carlton?
I suppose so, if he wants to.
Yes, but you must be serious about it. I hate people who are not serious about meals. It is so shallow of them.
Lady Bracknell and Miss Fairfax.
Well, dear Algernon, I hope you're behaving well.
I'm feeling well, Aunt Augusta.
It's not quite the same thing. In fact, the two rarely go together. Good afternoon, Mr. Worthing. How do you do?
Dear me, you are smart.
I am always smart, aren't I, Mr. Worthing?
You are quite perfect, Miss Fairfax.
So I hope I am not that. That will leave no room for developments, and I intend to develop in many directions.
I apologise if we're a little late, Algernon, but I was obliged to call on dear Lady Harbury. I hadn't seen her since her poor husband's death. You never saw a woman so altered. She looks quite 20 years younger. I'll have a cup of tea and one of those nice cucumber sandwiches you promised me.
Good heavens, Lane. Why are there no cucumber sandwiches? I ordered them specially.
There were no cucumbers in the market, sir. I went down twice.
No cucumbers.
No, sir. Not even for ready money.
That will do, Lane. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm greatly distressed, Aunt Augusta, about there being no cucumbers, not even for ready money.
It really makes no matter, Algernon. I had crumpets with Lady Harbury, who seems to be living entirely for pleasure now.
I hear her hair turned quite gold from grief.
It certainly has changed colour. From what cause, I of course cannot say. Thank you. I've quite a treat for you tonight, Algernon. I'm going to send you down with Mary Farquhar. She's such a nice young woman, and so attentive to her husband. It is delightful to watch them.
I'm afraid, Aunt Augusta, I shall have to give up the pleasure of dining with you tonight after all.
I hope not, Algernon. It would put my table completely out. Your uncle would have to dine upstairs. Fortunately, he's accustomed to that.
It is a great bore, but the fact is, I've had a telegram to say that my poor friend Bunbury is very ill again. They seem to think I should be with him.
It's very strange. This Mr. Bunbury seems to suffer from curiously bad health.
Yes, poor Bunbury. Dreadful invalid.
Really, I must say, Algernon, I think it is high time that Mr. Bunbury made up his mind whether he was going to live or die. This shilly-shallying with the question is absurd. Nor do I in any way approve of this modern sympathy with invalids. I consider it morbid. Illness is hardly a thing to be encouraged in others. Health is the primary duty of life. I'm always telling that to your poor uncle, though he never seems to take any notice as far as improvement in his many ailments goes. But I would be much obliged if you would ask Mr. Bunbury from me to be so kind as to not have a relapse on Saturday, for I rely on you to arrange my music for me. It is my last reception, and one wants something that will encourage conversation, particularly at the end of the season, when everyone has practically said everything they have to say.
Well, I shall speak to Bunbury, Aunt Augusta, if he is still conscious. But I think I can promise you he'll be all right on Saturday. Of course, the music is a great difficulty, but I'll run over the programme I've drawn out if you'll come with me into the next room for a moment.
It's very thoughtful of you, Algernon, and I'm sure the programme will be delightful after a few expurgations. Gwendolen, you will follow.
Certainly, Mamma.
Charming day it has been, Miss Fairfax.
Pray, don't talk to me about the weather, Mr. Worthing. Whenever people talk to me about the weather, I feel quite certain they mean something else, and that makes me so nervous.
I do mean something else.
I thought so.
And I'd like to be allowed to take advantage of Lady Bracknell's temporary absence.
Certainly advise you to do so. Mamma has a way of coming back suddenly into a room. That I've had to speak to her about.
Miss Fairfax, ever since I've met you, I've admired you more than any other girl I've ever met in my life. Ever since I've met you.
Yes, I'm quite aware of that fact. And I only wish that, in public at any rate, you would be more demonstrative. For me, you've always had an irresistible fascination. Even before I met you, I was far from indifferent to you. We live, as I hope you know, Mr. Worthing, in an age of ideals. The fact is constantly mentioned in the more expensive monthly magazines. And my ideal has always been to love someone with the name of Earnest. There's something in the name that inspires absolute confidence. From the moment Algernon first mentioned to me that he had a friend called Earnest, I knew I was destined to love you.
You really love me, Gwendolen.
Passionately.
Oh, darling, you don't know how happy you've made me.
My own Earnest.
Of course, you don't really mean to say that you couldn't love me if my name wasn't Ernest.
But your name is Earnest.
Yes, I know it is, but supposing it was something else. Do you mean to say you couldn't love me then?
Oh, that is only a metaphysical speculation, and like all metaphysical speculations, has very little reference to the actual facts of life as we know them.
Well, really, darling, to speak quite candidly, I don't care much about the name of Ernest. I don't think the name suits me at all.
It suits you perfectly. It is a divine name. It has a music of its own. It produces vibrations.
Well, really, Gwendolen, I must say, I think there are much other nicer names. I think Jack, for instance, a charming name.
Jack. No, there is very little music in the name Jack, if any at all, indeed. It has no thrill. It produces absolutely no vibrations. I've known several Jacks, and all without exception have been more than usually plain. Besides, Jack is notorious domesticity for the name John, and I pity any woman who is married to a man called John. She would probably never be allowed to know the entrancing pleasure of a single moment's solitude. No, the only really safe name is Earnest.
Darling, I must be Chris. We must get married at once.
Married, Mr. Worthing?
Well, certainly. You know that I love you, Miss Fairfax, and I was led to believe that you were not absolutely indifferent to me.
I adore you, but you haven't proposed to me yet. Nothing's been said at all about marriage. The subject has not even been touched upon.
Well, may I propose to you now?
I think it would be an admirable opportunity.
Well then, Gwendolen, will you marry me?
Of course I will, darling. How long you've been about it. I'm afraid you've had very little practice in how to propose.
My own one. You were the only girl I've ever loved in my life.
Yes, but men often propose for practice. Oh, Ernest, what wonderfully brown eyes you have. They're quite brown. I hope you will always look at me just like that, especially when other people are present.
Mr. Worthing! Rise, sir, from this semi-recumbent posture. 'Tis most indecorous.
Mamma, I must beg you to retire. This is no place for you. Besides, Mr. Worthing is not quite finished yet.
Finished what, may I ask?
I am engaged to Mr. Worthing, Mamma.
Pardon me, you are not engaged to anyone. When you do become engaged to anyone, I, or your father, should his health permit him, will inform you of the fact. An engagement should always come on a young girl as a surprise, pleasant or unpleasant as the case may be. It is hardly a matter she should be allowed to arrange for herself. And now, Mr. Worthing, I have some questions to put to you. And while I am making these inquiries, Gwendolen, you will wait for me below in the carriage.
Mamma!
In the carriage, Gwendolen! Gwendolen! The carriage!
Yes, Mamma.
You may take a seat, Mr. Worthing.
Thank you, Lady Bracknell, but I prefer standing.
I've been bound to tell you that you are not down on my list of eligible young men. Although I have the same list as the dear Duchess of Bolton has. We work together, in fact. However, I am quite ready to enter your name, should your answers be what a really affectionate mother requires. Do you smoke?
Well, yes, I admit I must smoke.
I'm glad to hear it. A man should always have some sort of occupation. There are far too many idle men in London as it is. How old are you?
28.
A very good age to be married at. I've always been of the opinion that a man who desires to get married should either know everything or nothing. Which do you know?
I know nothing, Lady Bracknell.
I am pleased to hear it. I do not approve of anything that tampers with natural ignorance. Ignorance is like a delicate exotic fruit. Touch it and the bloom has gone. What is your income?
Between 7 and 8,000 a year.
In land or in investments?
In investments, chiefly.
That is satisfactory. What with the duties expected from one during one's lifetime, and the duties exacted from one after one's death, land has ceased to be either a profit or a pleasure. It gives one position and prevents one from keeping it up. That is all that can be said about land.
Well, I have a country house with some land, of course. About 1,500 acres.
A country house. How many rooms? Well, that can be cleared up afterwards. But you have a townhouse, I presume. A girl with a simple, unspoiled nature like Gwendolyn can hardly be expected to reside in the country.
I have a townhouse, yes, but it is let to by the year to Lady Bloxham. But I can acquire it when I like, at a 6 months' notice.
Lady Bloxham? I don't know her.
Oh, she goes about very little. She's a lady considerably advanced in years.
Well, nowadays, that is no guarantee of respectability of character. What number is your townhouse?
149?
The unfashionable side. I thought there was something. However, that could be easily altered. So now, to minor matters. Are your parents living?
Well, I'm afraid I've lost both my parents.
Both. To lose one parent may be regarded as a misfortune, but to lose both seems like carelessness. Who was your father? He seems to have been a man of some wealth. Was he born into what the radical papers call the purple of commerce, or did he rise from the ranks of the aristocracy?
I'm afraid I really don't know. You see, the fact is, Lady Bracknell, I have lost both my parents, but it would be nearer to the truth to say that they've lost me. I don't know who I am by birth. I was found.
Found?
Yes, Lady Bracknell, found. The old Mr. Thomas Cardew, a man of a charitable and kindly disposition, found me and gave me the name Worthing because he had a first-class ticket to Worthing in his pocket. Worthing is a seaside resort in Sussex.
Where did the charitable gentleman with a first-class ticket to a seaside resort find you?
In a handbag.
A handbag?
Yes, Lady Bracknell, a handbag. A rather large leather handbag with handles to it. Well, an ordinary handbag, in fact.
In what locality did this Mr. Thomas Cardew find this ordinary handbag?
In a cloakroom at Victoria Station.
Mr. Worthing, I must confess I feel somewhat bewildered by what you have just told me. To be born, or at any rate bred, in a handbag seems to me to display contempt for the ordinary decency of family life, to remind one of the worst excesses of the French Revolution. And I presume you know what that unfortunate movement led to? As to the locality in which the handbag was found, the cloakroom at a railway station may serve to conceal some social indiscretion, has probably been used for that purpose before now, but it can hardly be regarded as an assured basis for a recognized position in good society.
Well, then what would you advise me to do? I need hardly say, Lady Bracknell, that I would do anything in the world to ensure Gwendolyn's happiness.
Mr. Worthing, I would strongly advise you to acquire some relations of any kind as soon as possible, and to procure at any rate one parent of either sex before the season is quite over.
Well, I don't know how I can possibly manage to do that. I can produce the handbag at any moment, though. It is in my bedroom at the house. I think that should satisfy you, Lady Bracknell.
Me? What has it to do with me, sir? You can hardly imagine that I and Lord Bracknell would allow our only daughter, a girl brought up with the utmost care, to marry into a cloakroom and form an alliance with a handbag. Good morning, Mr. Worthing.
Good morning. Lady Bracknell. Please, no. Would you stop playing that ghastly tune? How idiotic!
Didn't it go off all right, old boy? You don't mean to say Gwendolyn refused you?
As far as I'm concerned, Gwendolyn and I are engaged. Her mother is perfectly unbearable. Never met such a gorgon. You don't think there's a chance of Gwendolyn turning out like her mother in 150 years or so, do you, Algy?
Oh, all women become like their mothers. It is their great tragedy. No man does, that's his.
Is that clever?
It is perfectly phrased and quite as true as any observation in civilized life need be.
I'm sick to death of cleverness. Everyone's clever nowadays. You can't go anywhere without meeting clever people. The thing has become an absolute public nuisance. I wish to goodness we had a few fools left.
We have.
Oh, I should extremely like to meet them. What do they talk about?
The fools? Oh, about the clever people, of course. By the way, did you tell Gwendolen about your being Earnest in town and Jack in the country?
Oh, the truth isn't something one tells to these sort of people. What extraordinary ideas you have about the way to behave to a woman.
The only way to behave to a woman is to love her if she is pretty and someone else if she is plain.
Oh, that's nonsense.
What about your brother, the profligate Earnest?
Oh, I shall find some way to get rid of him. I'll say he died in Paris of apoplexy. Lots of people die of apoplexy nowadays, don't they, Algy?
Yes, but that's hereditary, my dear fellow. It's the sort of thing that runs in families. You'd much better say a severe chill.
And you're sure a severe chill isn't hereditary or anything of the kind?
Of course it isn't.
Very well, then. My poor brother Ernest is carried off in Paris by a severe chill. There, that gets rid of him.
But I thought you said that Miss Cardew was a little much too interested in your poor brother Ernest.
No, that's all right. Cecily is not a silly romantic girl. She's a capital appetite, goes for long walks and pays attention to none of her lessons.
I should quite like to see Cecily.
I shall make sure you never do. She's excessively pretty and only just 18.
Does Gwendolen know that you have an excessively pretty young ward who is only just 18?
Oh, one doesn't blurt these sort of things out to people. I bet you anything that Cecily and Gwendolen are perfectly certain to be extremely great friends. I bet you anything you like that about half an hour after they meet, they'll be calling each other sister.
Women only do that after they've called each other a lot of other things first. Now, if we want to get a good table at the Carlton, we really must go and dress. I'm hungry.
Oh, I never knew you when you weren't.
Miss Fairfax.
Gwendolen, upon my word.
Would you kindly turn your back? I have something very particular to say to Mr. Worthing.
Really, Gwendolen, I don't think I can allow
Would you pray
this.
oblige me by turning your back? Ernest. We may never be married. From the expression on Mamma's face, I fear we never shall. Few parents nowadays pay any regard to what their children say to them. The old-fashioned respect for young is rapidly dying out. Whatever influence I had over Mamma, I lost at the age of 3. But though she may prevent us from becoming man and wife, and I shall marry someone else, and marry often, nothing she can possibly do can alter my eternal devotion to you.
Dear Gwendolen.
The story of your romantic origin, as related to me by Mamma, with unpleasing comments, has naturally stirred the deeper fibres of my nature. Your Christian name is an irresistible fascination. The simplicity of your character makes you exquisitely incomprehensible to me. Your town address at the Albany I have, but what is your address in the country?
The Manor House, Walton, Hertfordshire.
How long will you be in town?
Till Monday.
Good. Algy, you may turn back now.
Thanks, I've turned round already.
You may also ring the bell.
You will let me see you to your carriage, my own darling?
Certainly.
I will see Miss Fairfax out.
More bills. Tomorrow, Lane, I'm going Bunburying.
Yes, sir.
I shall probably not be back till Monday. You can put up all my dress clothes, the smoking jacket, and all the Bunbury suits.
Yes, sir.
I hope tomorrow will be a fine day, Lane.
It never is, sir.
You're a perfect pessimist, Lane.
I do my best to give satisfaction.
There's a sensible, intellectual girl. The only girl I've ever cared for in my life. What on earth do you find so amusing?
Oh, I'm a little worried about Bunbury, that's all.
Well, if you don't take care, your friend Bunbury is going to get you into a serious scrape someday.
I love scrapes. They're the only thing that's never serious.
Oh, that's nonsense. The only thing you ever talk about is nonsense.
Nobody ever does. Besides, I love nonsense. The Manor House, Walton, Hertfordshire.
Cecily? Cecily! Surely it is more Molten's duty to water the flowers than yours. Your German grammar's on the table. Pray to open to page 15. We'll repeat yesterday's lesson.
But I don't like German. It isn't an all-becoming language. And besides, I know perfectly well I always look quite plain after my German lesson.
Child, you know how anxious your guardian is that you should improve yourself in every way. He laid particular stress on your German as he was leaving for town yesterday.
Uncle Jack is so serious. Sometimes he's so serious, I think he cannot be quite well.
Your guardian is of the best of health, and his gravity of demeanour is especially to be commended in one so comparatively young as he is. I know no one with higher sense of duty or responsibility.
I suppose that is why he looks a little bored when we three are together.
Cecily, I'm surprised at you. Mr. Worthing has many troubles in his life. Idle merriment and triviality would be out of place in his conversation. And you must remember his constant anxiety about that unfortunate young man, his brother.
I wish Uncle Jack would allow him to come over here sometimes. I think we might have a good influence over him, Miss Prism. I'm sure you certainly would. You know, German and geology and things of that kind that influence a man so much.
I do not think even I would produce any effect on a character that is, according to his own brother's admission, irretrievably weak and vacillating. Indeed, I'm not sure I would desire to reclaim him. I'm not in favour at the moment's notice for this modern mania of turning bad people into good people. You must put away your diary, Cecily. I really don't see why I should keep a diary at all.
I keep a diary in order to enter all my wonderful secrets of my life. If I didn't write them down, I would probably forget all about them.
Memory, my dear Cecily, is the diary we all carry about with us.
Yes, but it records the things that haven't possibly have happened and couldn't possibly have happened. I mean, I believe that memory is responsible for all the novels Moody sends us.
Do not speak slightingly of novels, Cecily. I wrote one myself in earlier days.
Was your novel ever published?
Alas, no. Unfortunately, the manuscript was abandoned. I like to use the word in a sense of lost or mislaid. To your work, child. These speculations are profitless.
But I see Dr. Chasuble coming up through the garden.
Oh, Dr. Chasuble, this is indeed a pleasure.
And how are we this morning? Miss Prism, you are, I trust, well?
Miss Prism has just been complaining of a slight headache. I think it would do her so much good to take a stroll with you in the park, Dr. Chasuble.
Cecily, I've not mentioned anything about a headache.
Yes, I know that, Miss Prism, but I felt instinctively that you had a headache. Indeed, I was thinking about it and not about my German lesson when the director came in.
Well, I hope, Cecily, you're not inattentive.
Oh, I'm afraid I am.
Well, that is strange. Were I fortunate enough to be Miss Prism's pupil, I would hang upon her lips. I spoke metaphorically. The metaphor was drawn from bees. I suppose Mr. Worthing has not returned from town yet.
We do not expect him till Monday afternoon.
Ah, yes. He likes to spend his Sundays in London. He's not one of those whose sole aim is enjoyment, as by all accounts the unfortunate young man his brother seems to be. But I must not disturb Egeria and her pupil any longer.
Egeria? My name is Letitia, Doctor.
A classical allusion, merely, drawn from the pagan authors. I will see you both, no doubt, at evensong.
I think, dear Doctor, I will have a stroll with you. I find I have a headache after all, and a walk might do it good.
With pleasure, Miss Prism, with pleasure. We might go as far as the schools and back.
Oh, that would be delightful. Cecily, you'll read your political economy in my absence. The chapter on the fall of rupee you may omit. It is somewhat too exciting for a young girl.
Horrid political economy. Horrid geography. Horrid German.
Mr. Ernest Worthing has just driven over from the station. He's brought his luggage with him.
Mr. Ernest Worthing be for the Albany. Uncle Jack's brother. Did you tell him Mr. Worthing was in town?
Yes, miss. He seemed very much disappointed. I told him that you and Miss Prism were in the garden. He said he was anxious to speak to you privately for a moment.
Ask Mr. Worthing to come out here, and I suppose you better speak to the housekeeper about a room for him.
Yes, miss.
I've never met any really wicked person before. I feel rather frightened. I'm afraid he will look just like anyone else. He does.
You are my little cousin Cecily, I'm sure.
You are under some strange mistake. I'm not little. In fact, I believe I'm more than usually tall for my age. But yes, I'm Cousin Cecily, and you, I see from your card, are Uncle Jack's brother, my cousin Ernest, my wicked cousin Ernest.
Oh, I'm not really wicked at all, Cousin Cecily. You mustn't think I'm wicked.
If you are not, you've certainly been deceiving us all in a very inexcusable manner. I hope you have not been leading a double life, pretending to be wicked and really being good all the time. That would be hypocrisy.
Of course. I have been rather reckless.
I'm glad to hear it.
In fact, now that you mention the subject, I've been very bad in my own small way.
I don't think you should be proud of that. though I'm sure it has been very pleasant.
It's much pleasanter being here with you.
I don't know how you hear at all. Uncle Jack won't be back till Monday afternoon.
That's a great disappointment, as I'm obliged to go up on Monday morning.
I think you better wait until Uncle Jack arrives. I know he wants to speak to you about your emigrating.
About my what?
You're emigrating. He's sending you to Australia.
Australia? I'd sooner die.
Well, he said at dinner on Wednesday night that you would have to choose between this world, the next world, and Australia.
Oh. The accounts I've received of Australia and the next world are not entirely encouraging. This world is good enough for me, Cousin Cecily.
Yes, but are you good enough for it?
I'm afraid I'm not. That is why I want you to reform me. You might make that your mission if you don't mind, Cousin Cecily.
I'm afraid I've no time this afternoon.
Then would you mind my reforming myself?
It's rather quixotic of you, but I think you should try.
I will. I feel better already.
You are looking a little worse.
That is because I'm hungry.
Oh, how thoughtless of me. I should have remembered that when one is going to lead an entirely new life, one requires regular and wholesome meals. Won't you come in?
Thank you. Won't you give me a rose?
A marshmallow?
I'd sooner have a pink rose.
Why?
Because you are like a pink rose, Cousin Cecily.
I don't think you should speak to me like that. Miss Prism never says such things to me.
Then Miss Prism is a very short-sighted old lady. You are the prettiest girl I ever saw.
Miss Prism says that all good looks are a snare.
They're a snare that every sensible man should like to be caught in.
I don't think I would care to catch a sensible man. I wouldn't know what to talk to him about.
Where is Cecily? You are too much alone, dear Dr. Chasuble. You should get married. A misanthrope, I understand. A womanthrope, never.
The precept as well as the practice of the primitive church was distinctly against matrimony.
That is obviously the reason why the primitive church has not lasted up to present day. And you do not seem to realize, dear doctor, that by persistently remaining single, a man converts himself into a permanent public temptation. Men should be more careful. This very celibacy tends to lead weaker vessels astray.
But is a man not equally as attractive when he's married?
No married man is ever attractive except to his wife.
And often, I've been told, not even to her.
But where is Cecily?
Perhaps she followed us to the schools.
Mr. Worthing?
Mr. Worthing.
This is indeed a surprise. We do not look for you till Monday afternoon.
I have arrived sooner than I expected. Dr. Chasuble, I hope you are well.
Dear Mr. Worthing, I trust this garb of woe does not betoken with it some terrible calamity.
My brother,
More shameful debts and extravagancies.
Still leading his life for pleasure.
dead.
Your brother Earnest, dead.
Quite dead.
What a lesson for him. I trust he'll profit by it.
Mr. Worthing, I offer you my sincere condolences. You have at least the consolation of knowing you're always the most generous and forgiving of brothers.
Poor Ernest, he had many faults, but it is a sad blow.
Very sad indeed. Were you with him at the end?
No, he died abroad in Paris. I had a telegram delivered to me by the manager of the Grand Hotel.
Was the cause of death mentioned?
A severe chill, it seems.
None of us are perfect. I myself am particularly susceptible to drafts. Will the intimate take place here?
No, he seemed to have expressed a desire to be buried in Paris.
In Paris? Well, I fear that hardly points to a very serious state of mind at the last. You will no doubt wish me to make some slight allusion to this terrible domestic affliction on Sunday. My sermon on the meaning of man in the wilderness can be adapted to almost any occasion, joyful or, as in the present case, distressing. I have preached at harvest celebrations, christenings, confirmation, days of humiliation, and festal days. The last time I delivered it was in the cathedral as a charity sermon for the Society for the Prevention of Discontent amongst the upper classes. The bishop who was present was much struck by some of the analogies I made.
That reminds me, Dr. Chasuble. You mentioned christenings, I think. I suppose you know how to christen? I mean, you are continually christening, all right?
It is, I regret to say, one of the rector's most constant duties in his parish. I've often spoken to the poor classes on the subject, but they don't seem to know what thrift is.
But is there a particular infant in whom you're interested, Mr. Worthing? Your brother was, I believe, unmarried, was he not?
Oh, yes. Quite unmarried.
People who live entirely for pleasure usually are.
But it is not for any child, dear doctor. No, I'm quite fond of children. No, the fact is, I'd like to have myself christened this afternoon, if you have nothing else better to do.
But surely, Mr. Worthing, you've been christened already.
I don't remember anything about it. Of course, I don't think the thing would bother you, or if you think I'm a little too old now.
Not at all. The sprinkling and indeed immersion of adults is a perfectly canonical practice.
Immersion?
Oh, no, you need have no apprehensions. Sprinkling is all that is necessary, or I think advisable. Our weather is so changeable. What hour would you wish the ceremony to be performed?
Oh, I might trot around at about 5 o'clock, if that would suit you.
Oh, perfectly. In fact, I have 2 similar ceremonies to perform at the time. A case of twins has occurred recently in one of the outlying cottages in her own estate. Poor Jenkins the carter, most hard-working man.
Oh, I don't see much fun in being christened along with other babies. No, it would be childish. Would 5:30 do?
Admirably, admirably. Now, dear Mr. Worthing, I will not intrude into a house of sorrow any longer. I would merely beg of you not to be too much bowed down by grief. What seems to us bitter trials are often blessings in disguise.
This seems to me a blessing of extremely obvious kind.
Oh, Uncle Jack, I'm so pleased to see you back. What horrid clothes you've got on. Do go and change them.
Cecily!
What's the matter, Uncle Jack? You look as if you've had a toothache. Oh, do be happy. I've got such a surprise for you. Guess who's in the dining room? Your brother!
Who?
Your brother, Ernest. He arrived here half an hour ago.
That's nonsense. I haven't got a brother.
Uncle Jack, do not say that. No matter how bad he must have behaved to you in the past, he is still your brother. You wouldn't be so heartless as to disown him, would you? I'll tell him to come out, and you will shake hands with him, won't you, Uncle Jack?
These are very joyful tidings.
After we'd all been resigned to his loss, his sudden return seems to me particularly distressing.
My brother is in the dining room. I don't know what this all means. I think it is perfectly absurd. Good heavens!
Brother John, I have come down from town to tell you that I'm very sorry for all the trouble I've given you, and that I intend to lead a better life in the future.
Go away!
Uncle Jack, you are not going to refuse your own brother's hand.
Nothing will induce me to do anything of the kind. His being here is disgraceful. He knows perfectly well why.
Uncle Jack, do be nice. There is some good in everyone. Ernest has just been telling me about his poor invalid friend, Mr. Bunbury, whom he goes to visit so often.
Of course, the faults are all on my side, but I must say, I think Brother John's coldness to me is peculiarly painful. I'd expected a more enthusiastic welcome, especially considering it is the first time I've come here.
Uncle Jack, if you do not shake hands with Ernest, I will never forgive you.
Very well. I suppose I must then.
It's pleasant, is it not, to see so perfect a reconciliation? I think we might lead the 2 brothers together.
Cecily, you'll come with me.
Certainly, Miss Prism.
Algy, you have got to get out of here at once. I do not allow any bumbering here.
I've put Mr. Ernest's things in the room next to yours, sir. I suppose that's all right.
What?
Mr. Ernest's luggage, sir. I've unpacked it and put in the room next to your own.
I'm afraid I shall only be able to stay for a week this time.
Merriman, order the dog out at once. Mr. Earnest has suddenly been called back to town.
Yes, sir.
Jack, Cecily is a darling.
You are not to talk of Miss Cardew like that. I don't like it.
I don't like your clothes. You look perfectly ridiculous in them. Why on earth don't you go up and change? It is perfectly childish to be in deep mourning for a man who happens to be staying with you in your own house as a guest for a week. I call it grotesque.
You are certainly not staying with me for a week or for anything else. You have got to leave by the 4:05 train.
Well, I can't leave you while you're in deep mourning. It would be most unfriendly. If I were in mourning, you would stay with me, I suppose. I should think it very unkind if you didn't.
Well, will you go if I change my clothes?
Yes, if you're not too long about it. I never saw anybody take so long to dress with such little result.
Well, it is better than being as overdressed as you are.
There you are.
Oh, I merely came back to water the flowers. I thought you were with Uncle Jack.
He's gone to order the dog cart for me.
Oh, is he going to take you for a nice drive?
He's sending me away.
Then we've got to part.
I'm afraid so.
The door cart is at the door, sir.
It can wait, Merriman, for 5 minutes.
Yes, miss.
I hope, Cecily, I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection.
I think your frankness does you great credit, Ernest. If you allow me, I would like to copy your remarks into my diary.
Do you really keep a diary? I'd give anything to look at it. May
Oh,
I?
no. You see, it's simply a young girl's record of her own thoughts and impressions, and consequently meant for publication. But pray, Ernest, don't stop. I delight in taking down from dictation. I've reached absolute perfection. You can go on. I'm quite ready for more.
Cecily, ever since I first looked upon your wonderful, incomparable beauty, I have dared to love you passionately, wildly, devotedly, hopelessly.
I don't think you should tell me you love me wildly, passionately, hopelessly. Hopelessly doesn't seem to make much sense, does it?
Cecily,
The door cut is waiting, sir.
tell her to come round next week at the same hour.
Yes, sir.
I think Uncle Jack would be very much annoyed to find out that you were staying on till next week at the same hour.
I don't care about Jack. I don't care for anybody in the whole world but you. I love you, Cecily. You will marry me, won't you?
You silly boy, why, we've been engaged for the last 3 months.
The last 3 months?
Yes, 3 months on Thursday.
But how did we become engaged?
Well, ever since dear Uncle Jack first confessed to us that he had a younger brother who was very wicked and bad, you, of course, have formed chief topic of conversation between myself and Miss Prism, and one who's often talked about is always very attractive. One feels that there must be something in him after all. I dare say it was foolish of me, but I fell in love with you, Ernest.
Darling. And when was the engagement actually settled?
On the 14th of June last, worn out by your entire ignorance of my existence, I determined to end the matter one way or another, and after a long suffering with myself, I accepted you here. And the next day, I bought this little ring in your name, and this is the true lover's knot, which I promised you always to wear.
Did I really buy this for you? It's very pretty, isn't it?
Yes, you've exceedingly good taste, Ernest. It's the excuse I've always given you for leading such a bad life. And this is the box in which I keep all your dear letters.
But my own sweet Cecily, I've never written you any letters.
You need hardly remind me of that, Ernest. I remember only too well I was forced to write your letters for you. I wrote always 3 times a week, and sometimes oftener.
Oh, do let me read them, Cecily.
I couldn't possibly. It would make you far too conceited.
What a perfect angel you are.
Oh, you dear romantic boy. Your hair curls naturally, doesn't it?
Yes, darling, with a little help from others.
I'm so glad.
And you'll never break off our engagement, will you, Cecily?
I couldn't possibly, now that I've actually met you, of course. And of course, there is the question of your name.
Yes, of course.
You must not laugh at me, darling, but it's always been a very girlish dream of mine to love someone whose name was Earnest. There is something in the name that inspires absolute perfection. I pity any poor woman who's married to a man who's not called Earnest.
But my own sweet child, do you mean to say you could not love me if I had some other name?
But what name?
Oh, any name you like. Algernon, for instance.
But I don't like the name Algernon.
Well, I really can't see why not. There's nothing bad in it. In fact, it is a rather aristocratic name. But seriously, Cecily, if I had some other name, couldn't you love me?
I might respect you, Ernest. I might admire your character, but I'm afraid I would not be able to give you my undivided attention.
Cecily, your rector here is, I suppose, thoroughly experienced in the practice of all the rites and ceremonials of the church?
Oh, yes, Dr. Chosable's a most learned man. He's never written a single book, so you can imagine how much he knows.
I must see him at once on a matter of important christening. I mean business. I shall be back in half an hour.
What an impetuous boy he is. I do like his hair so much. I must enter his proposal into my diary.
A Miss Fairfax has just called to see Mr. Worthing on very important business, Miss Fairfax states.
Is it Mr. Worthing in his library?
Mr. Worthing went over in the direction of the rectory some time ago.
Miss Fairfax. I suppose one of the many elderly good women who are associated with Uncle Jack and his philanthropic work in London. I don't like women who are interested in philanthropic work. It's so forward of them.
Yes, miss.
Pray, ask the lady to come out here. I'm sure Mr. Worthing's to be back soon. And you can bring tea.
Yes, miss. Miss Fairfax.
Pray, let me introduce myself to you. My name is Cecily Cardew.
Cecily Cardew. What a very sweet name. Something tells me we're going to be great friends. I like you already more than I can say. My first impressions of people are never wrong.
How sweet of you to like me after we've known each other for such a comparatively short time. Oh, pray, sit down.
I may call you Cecily, may I not?
With pleasure.
And you will always call me Gwendolen, won't you?
If you wish.
Then that is all settled, is it not?
I hope so.
Perhaps it is favourable for my mentioning who I am. My father's Lord Bracknell. You've never heard of Papa, I suppose.
I don't think so.
Outside of the family circle, Papa, I'm glad to say, is entirely unknown. I think that is quite as it should be. The home seems to me to be the proper sphere for the man. Cecily, Mamma, whose views on education are remarkably strict, has brought me up to be extremely short-sighted. It's part of her system, so do you mind my looking at you through my glasses?
Oh, not at all, Gwendolen. I'm very fond of being looked at.
You are here on short visit, I suppose.
Oh, no, I live here.
Really? Your mother, no doubt, or some other female relative of advanced years resides here also.
No, I have no mother, nor, in fact, any relations.
Indeed.
Yes, my guardian with the assistance of Miss Prism have the arduous task of looking after me.
Your guardian?
Yes, Mr. Worthing?
Oh. It's very strange. He never mentioned to me that he had a ward. How secretive of him. He grows more interesting hourly. I cannot say, however, that the news inspires feelings of unmixed delight. I'm very fond of you, Cecily. I've liked you ever since I met you, but I'm bound to state that now that I know you are Mr. Worthing's ward, I can't help but express the wish that you were, well, just a little older than you appear to be, and not so alluring in appearance. In fact, if I may speak candidly...
Oh, pray do. I feel that when one is going to say something very unkind, one should always be quite candid.
Oh, to speak with perfect candour, Cecily, I wish you were fully 40 and more than usually plain for your age. Ernest has a strong, upright nature. He's the very soul and truth of honour. But even men with the highest possible moral character are extremely susceptible to the physical charms of others.
I beg your pardon, Gwendolen. Did you say Ernest?
Yes.
Oh, but it is not Ernest Worthing who is my guardian. It is his brother, his elder brother.
Ernest never mentioned to me that he had a brother.
I'm sorry to say, but they have not been on good terms for a very long time.
That accounts for it. Now that I think of it, no man ever mentions his brother. The subject is distasteful to most men. Of course, you're quite sure that it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is your guardian.
Quite sure. In fact, I'm going to be his.
I beg your pardon.
Dearest Gwendolen, there's no reason to keep it a secret from you. Our little county newspaper is sure to chronicle the fact next week. Mr. Ernest Worthing and I are engaged to be married.
Miss Cardew, I'm afraid there must be some slight error. Mr. Ernest Worthing is engaged to me. The announcement will appear in the Morning Post on Saturday at the latest.
You are under some strange misconception, Gwendolen, but Ernest proposed to me exactly 10 minutes ago.
It is certainly very curious, for he asked me to be his wife yesterday afternoon at 5:30. If you care to verify the incident, pray do so. I never travelled at my diary. I'm sorry if it is any possible disappointment to you, Miss Cardew, but I'm afraid I have the prior claim.
It would distress me more than I can tell you, dearest Gwendolen, if it's caused you any mental or physical anguish. But because Ernest proposed to you, he has clearly changed his mind.
If the poor fellow has been entrapped into any foolish promise, I consider it my duty to rescue him at once, and with a firm hand.
Whatever unfortunate entanglement my dear boy may have gotten into, I will never reproach him with it until after we are married.
Do you allude to me, Miss Cardew, as an entanglement? You are presumptuous. On an occasion of this kind, it becomes more than moral duty to speak one's mind. It becomes a pleasure.
Do you suggest, Miss Fairfax, that I entrapped Ernest into an engagement? How dare you? This is no time for wearing the shallow mask of manners. When I see a spade, I call it a spade.
I'm glad to say I've never seen a spade. It is obvious our social spheres have been widely different.
Shall I lay tea here as usual, miss?
Yes, as usual.
Quite a well-kept garden this is, Miss Cardew.
So glad you like it, Miss Fairfax.
I I had no idea there were any flowers in the country.
Oh, flowers are as common here, Miss Fairfax, as people are in London.
Personally, I cannot understand how anybody manages to exist in the country, if anybody who is anybody does. The country always bores me to death.
Ah, that is what the newspapers call agricultural depression, is it not? I heard the aristocracy are suffering very much from it at present. It's almost an epidemic amongst them, as I've been told. Tea, Miss Fairfax?
Thank you.
Sugar?
No, thank you. Sugar's not fashionable anymore.
Cake or bread and butter?
Bread and butter, please. A cake is rarely seen at the best houses nowadays. You have filled my tea with lumps of sugar, and though I asked most distinctly for bread and butter, you've given me cake. I'm known for the gentleness of my disposition and the extraordinary sweetness of my nature, but I warn you, Miss Cardew, you may go too far.
To save my dear, innocent, trusting boy from the machinations of another woman, there are no lengths to which I would not go.
From the moment I met you, I distrusted you. I thought you were false and deceiving. I'm rarely deceived in such matters. My first impressions of people are invariably right.
It seems to me, Miss Fairfax, that I'm trespassing on your valuable time. I have no doubt you have many other calls of a similar character to make in the neighborhood.
Ernest, my own Ernest.
Dear Gwendolen.
A moment. May I ask if you're engaged to be married to this young lady?
Oh, to dear little Cecily? Of course not. What could have put such an idea into your pretty little head?
Thank you. You may.
I knew there must have been some misconception, dearest Gwendolen. The gentleman whose arm is present round your waist is my dear guardian, Mr. John Worthing.
I beg your pardon.
This is Uncle Jack.
Jack. Oh.
And here is Ernest.
My own love.
A moment. Ernest, may I ask you if you're engaged to be married to this young lady?
What young lady? Gwendolen? No, of course not. What could have put such an idea into your pretty little head?
Thank you. You may.
I knew there must be some slight air, Miss Cardew. The gentleman who was now embracing you was my cousin, Mr. Algernon Moncrief.
You're called Algernon?
I cannot deny it.
Oh, is your name really John?
I could deny it if I liked. I could deny anything if I liked, but my name certainly is John. It has been John for years.
A gross deception has been practiced on both of us.
My poor wounded Cecily.
Oh, my sweet wronged Gwendolen.
You will call me sister, will you not?
There is a question I would like to be allowed to ask my guardian.
An admirable idea. Mr. Worthing, there's just one question I'd like to be permitted to put to you. Where is your brother Ernest? We are both engaged to be married to Ernest, so it is of some importance that we know where your brother Ernest is at present.
Gwendolen, Cecily, it pains me very much to have to speak the truth to you. It is the first time in my life that I've ever been reduced to such a painful position, and I'm quite inexperienced in doing anything of the kind. However, to speak quite frankly, I have no brother Ernest. I have no brother at all. I've never had a brother in my life, and I certainly do not plan on ever having one in the future.
No brother at all?
None.
Not of any kind?
Never. Not even of any kind.
I'm afraid it is quite clear, Cecily, that neither of us is engaged to anyone.
Oh, it's not a pleasant position for a young girl to find herself in, is it?
Let us venture into the house. They will hardly come after us there.
No men are so cowardly.
This ghastly state of things is what you call bumbering, I suppose?
Yes, and a perfectly wonderful Bunbury it is. The most wonderful Bunbury I ever had in my life.
Well, the only small satisfaction I get from this whole wretched business is that your friend Bunbury is quite exploded. You won't be able to run off to the country as often as you used to do, Algy, and a very good thing it is, too.
Your brother looks a little off colour, doesn't he, Jack? You won't be able to disappear off to town as frequently as your wicked custom was. Not a bad thing either.
And as for your conduct towards Miss Cardew, I say that your taking in a sweet, sensible girl like that is quite inexcusable. To say nothing of the fact that she is my ward.
Well, I can see no possible defence at all for your deceiving a brilliant, clever, thoroughly experienced young woman like Miss Fairfax. To say nothing of the fact that she is my cousin.
I wanted to be engaged to Gwendolen, that is all. I love her.
Well, I simply wanted to be engaged to Cecily. I adore her.
There is certainly no chance of your marrying Miss Cardew.
Well, I don't see, Jack, much likelihood of you and Miss Fairfax being united.
How can you sit there calmly eating muffins when we are in this terrible trouble? I can't make out. You seem to me to be perfectly heartless.
Well, I can't eat muffins in an agitated manner. I should probably get butter all over my cuffs. One should only eat muffins quite calmly. It is the only way to eat them.
I said it was perfectly heartless of you eating muffins under the circumstances, that is all.
When I am in trouble, eating is the only thing that consoles me. Indeed, when I am in really great trouble, I refuse everything except food and drink. In this present moment, I am unhappy, so I am eating muffins. Besides, I happen to be particularly fond of muffins.
Well, that is no reason why you should be eating them in that greedy way.
I wish you would take tea cake instead. I really don't like tea cake.
Oh, good heavens. I suppose a man may eat his own muffins in his own garden.
Yes, but you've just said it was perfectly heartless.
I said it was perfectly heartless of you under the circumstances, that is all.
That may be, but the muffins are the same.
Algy, I wish to goodness you would go.
I cannot. I've just made arrangements with Dr. Chasuble to be christened under the name of Earnest at 5:45.
My dear fellow, the sooner you get rid of that nonsense, the better. I have made arrangements with Dr. Chasuble to have myself christened at 5:30 this afternoon, and naturally I will take the name of Earnest. Gwendolen would wish it. We can't both be christened Earnest, that would be absurd. And besides, I have every right to be christened if I like. There is no evidence at all that I've ever been christened by anyone. I think it's probable, and so does Dr. Chasuble. It is entirely different in your case. You have been christened already.
Yes, but I have not been christened in years.
Yes, but you have been christened. That is the important thing.
Quite so. So I know my constitution can stand it. If you were not quite certain about your ever being christened, I must say I think it rather dangerous you venturing on it now. It might make you unwell. You can hardly have forgotten that someone very closely connected with you was very nearly carried off in Paris this week by a severe chill. There you go with the muffins again. I wish you wouldn't. I told you, I am particularly fond of muffins.
Algy, I've already told you to go. I don't want you here. Why won't you go?
I haven't quite finished my tea yet.
You're drinking my tea.
It's not your tea. You're eating my muffins.
They are not your muffins.
They did not at once follow us into the house, as anyone else would have done, seems to me to show that they have some sense of shame left.
They've been eating muffins. That looks like repentance.
They're looking at us! What effrontery!
They're approaching. That's very forward of them.
Let us preserve a dignified silence. This dignified silence seems to produce an unpleasant effect.
Most distasteful.
But we will not be the first to speak.
Certainly not.
Mr. Worthing, I have something very particular to ask you. Much depends on your reply.
Mr. Moncrief, kindly answer me the following question. Why did you pretend to be my guardian's brother?
In order that I might have an opportunity of meeting you.
That certainly seems a satisfactory explanation, does it not?
Mr. Worthing, what explanation can you offer to me for pretending to have a brother? Was it in order that you could come to town and see me as often as possible?
Certainly, Miss Fairfax.
Their explanations appear quite satisfactory.
I'm more than content with what Mr. Moncrief said.
You think we should forgive them?
Yes. No. I mean no.
True. I had forgotten. There are principles at stake that one cannot surrender. Which of us should tell them? The task is not a pleasant one.
Could we not both speak at the same time?
An excellent idea. Will you take the time from me?
Certainly.
Your Christian names are still an insuperable barrier. That is all.
Will you take the time from me?
Our Christian names? Is that all? But we are going to be christened this afternoon.
For my sake, you're prepared to do this terrible thing.
I am.
To please me, you're ready to face this fearful ordeal?
I am.
How absurd to talk of the equality of the sexes. Where questions of self-sacrifice are concerned, men are infinitely beyond us.
We are.
Yes, they have moments of physical courage of which we women know absolutely nothing.
Darling.
Darling.
Lady Bracknell.
Good heavens!
Gwendolyn! What does this mean?
Merely that I am engaged to be married to Mr. Worthing, Mamma.
Sit down! Apprised, sir, of my daughter's sudden flight by her trusty maid, whose confidence I purchased by means of a small coin, I followed her at once by a luggage train. You must understand, Mr. Worthing, that all communication between yourself and my daughter must cease immediately from this moment. On this point, as indeed on all points, I am firm.
I am engaged to be married to Gwendolyn, Lady Bracknell.
You are nothing of the kind, sir. And now, as regards Algernon. Algernon!
Yes, Aunt Augusta.
Is this the house in which your invalid friend, Mr. Bunbury, resides?
Oh, no. Bunbury doesn't live here. Bunbury's somewhere else at present. In fact, Bunbury's dead.
Dead? When did Mr. Bunbury die? His death must have been extremely sudden.
Bunbury has exploded. Oh, I killed Bunbury this afternoon. Poor Bunbury died this afternoon. I should say the doctors found out Bunbury could not live, so Bunbury died.
Really, he seems to have had great confidence in the opinion of his physicians. However, I am glad that he has made up his mind and acted under proper medical advice. And now that we have buried Mr. Bunbury at last, may I ask you, Mr. Worthing, who is that young lady whose hand my nephew Algernon is holding in what seems to me a most peculiarly unnecessary manner?
That, my dear Lady Bracknell, is Miss Cecily Cardew, my ward.
I'm engaged to be married to Cecily, Aunt Augusta.
I beg your pardon.
Mr. Moncrief and I are engaged to be married, Lady Bracknell.
I do not know whether there is anything particularly exciting in the air of this part of Hertfordshire, but the amount of engagements that go on seem to me considerably above the proper average that statistics have laid down for our guidance. I do not think some preliminary inquiry on my part would be out of place. Mr. Worthing, who is Miss Cardew?
Miss Cardew is the granddaughter of the late Mr. Thomas Cardew of 149 Belgrave Square, SW, Gervais Park, Dorking, Surrey, and the Sporran, Fifeshire, NB.
That is not unsatisfactory. 3 addresses always inspire confidence. Even in the tradesmen. So far, I am satisfied.
I also have in my possession, you'd be pleased to hear, certificates of Miss Cardew's birth, registration, baptism, whooping cough, confirmation, registration, and the measles, both in the German and English variety.
Ha! A life crowded with instant, I see, although perhaps somewhat too exciting for a young girl. Gwendolyn, the time approaches for our departure. We have not a minute to lose. As a matter of form, Mr. Worthing, I'd better ask if Miss Cardew has any little fortune.
Oh, about £130,000 in the funds, that is all. Good day, Lady Bracknell. So pleased to have seen you.
A moment, Mr. Worthing. £130,000, and in the funds. Miss Cardew seems to me a most attractive young lady, now that I look at her. Come here, sweet child. Oh, dear child, your dress is sadly simple, and your hair seems almost as nature might have left it. However, that can all be easily altered. A thoroughly experienced French maid can make quite an impression in a very brief space of time. I remember recommending one to young Lady Lansing, and after 3 months, her own husband did not know her.
And after 6 months, nobody knew her.
Kindly turn round, sweet child. Algernon,
Yes, Aunt Augusta?
there are distinct social possibilities in Miss Cardew.
Cecily is the sweetest, dearest, prettiest girl in the whole world. I don't care twopence about social possibilities.
Never speak disrespectfully of society, Algernon. Only people who can't get into it do that. Of course, dear, you know, Algernon has only his debts to depend upon, but I do not approve of mercenary marriages. When I married Lord Bracknell, I had no fortune of any kind, but I never dreamed of letting that stand in my way. Well, I suppose I must give my consent.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
Cecily, you may kiss me.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
I think the marriage had better take place quite soon.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
To speak frankly, I'm not in favour of long engagements. They give people the opportunity of knowing each other's character before marriage, which I think is never advisable.
I pray, excuse me for interrupting you, Lady Bracknell, but this engagement is quite out of the question. I am Miss Cardew's guardian, and she cannot legally marry without my consent until she comes of age. That consent I absolutely decline to give.
Upon what grounds, may I ask?
Oh, it pains me very much to have to speak the truth to you, Lady Bracknell, about your nephew, but I suspect him of being untruthful.
Untruthful? My nephew Algernon? Impossible. He's an Oxonian.
No, I pray there can be no doubt about the matter. You see, this afternoon, during my temporary absence in London on an important question of romance, he obtained admission to my house by means of the false pretense of being my brother. Under an assumed name, he succeeded in the course of the afternoon by alienating the affections of my one and only ward. He subsequently stayed for tea and devoured every single muffin. And what makes his conduct all the more heartless is that he was perfectly well aware from the start that I have no brother, that I've never had a brother in my life, and that I certainly do not have the smallest intent of ever having one in the future. I distinctly told him so myself yesterday afternoon.
Ah, well, after careful consideration, Mr. Worthing, I have decided to entirely overlook my nephew's conduct to you. Come here, sweet child. How old are you?
Well, I'm really only 18, but I always say I'm 20 when I go to evening parties.
Well, it will not be long before you come of age and are free from the restraints of tutelage. So I do not think your guardian's consent, after all, a matter of any importance.
I pray excuse me for interrupting you again, Lady Bracknell, but it would only be fair to tell you that according to the terms of her grandfather's will, Miss Cecily does not legally come of age until she is 35.
That does not seem to me a very grave objection. 35 is a very attractive age. London society is full of women of the very highest birth, who have, by their own choice, remained 35 for years.
Algy, could you wait for me till I'm 35?
Of course I could, Cecily. You know I could.
Yes, I felt instinctively, but I could not wait all that time.
What is to be done, Cecily?
I don't know, Mr. Moncrief.
My dear Mr. Worthing, as Miss Cardew states that she positively cannot wait until she is 35, a statement which seems to me to display a somewhat impatient nature, I would beg of you to reconsider your decision.
Oh, my dear Lady Bracknell, the matter's entirely in your own hands. You see, the moment you consent to my marriage with Gwendolen, I will gladly let your nephew form an alliance with my ward.
Mr. Worthing, you must understand that that which you propose is out of the question.
Then a passionate celibacy is all we can look forward to.
That is not the destiny I propose for Gwendolen. Algernon, of course, can choose for himself. Come, dear, we must be going. We have already missed 5, if not 6 trains.
Is everything quite ready for the christenings?
Christening, sir. Is that not somewhat premature?
Both of these men have expressed an immediate desire for christening.
At their age? The idea is grotesque and irreligious. Algernon, I forbid you to be christened. I will not hear of such excesses. Lord Bracknell would be highly displeased if he learned that this was the way in which you wasted your time and money.
Am I to understand, then, there to be no christenings at all this afternoon?
I don't think so. As things now stand, it would be highly improbable to either of us, Dr. Chasuble.
I'm grieved to hear such sentiments from you, Mr. Worthing. Indeed, I must leave at once. Indeed, I've just been informed that for the last hour and a half, Miss Prism has been waiting for me in the vestry.
Miss Prism? I'm sorry. Did I hear you mention a Miss Prism?
Yes, Lady Bracknell. I'm on my way to join her.
Pray, allow me to detain you for a moment. This matter may prove to be one of vital importance to Lord Bracknell and myself. Is this Miss Prism a woman of repellent aspect, remotely connected with education?
She's the most cultivated of ladies, the very picture of respectability.
It is obviously the same person. May I ask what position she holds in your household?
I'm a celibate, madam.
Miss Prism has been for the last 3 years Miss Cardew's esteemed governess and valued companion.
I must see this Miss Prism at once. Let her be sent for.
A was told you expected me in the vestry, dear Canon. I've been waiting for you there for an hour and 3/4.
Miss Prism! Come here, Prism!
Lady Bracknell.
Prism, where is that baby? 27 years ago, you left Lord Bracknell's house, number 104 Upper Grosvenor Street, in charge of a preambulator containing a baby of the male sex. You never returned. Due to careful investigation of the Metropolitan Police, the preambulator was discovered standing alone at midnight in a remote corner of Bayswater. It contained a 3-volume novel of more than usually revolting sentimentality. But the baby was not inside. Prism, where is that baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with great shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day you mentioned, a day that is forever branded in my memory, I prepared as usual to take the baby out of the perambulator. I had also with me a somewhat old but capacious handbag in which I intended to place the manuscript of a work of fiction I'd worked on in my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction, I deposited the manuscript in the bassinet and placed the baby in the handbag.
But where did you deposit the handbag?
Do not ask me, Mr. Worthing.
Miss Prism, this is a matter of no small importance to me. I insist on knowing where you deposited the handbag.
In the cloakroom of Victoria Station, the Brighton line.
I must retire to my room for a moment. Gwendolen, will you wait for me?
For not too long, I'll wait here for you all my life.
What do you think this means, Lady Bracknell?
I dare not even suspect, Dr. Chasuble.
Uncle Jack seems strangely agitated.
Your guardian has a very emotional nature.
This noise is extremely unpleasant.
Just stop now.
I wish he would arrive at some conclusion.
The suspense is terrible. I hope it will last.
Where is it? Is this the handbag, Miss Prism? Examine it carefully before you speak. The happiness of more than one life depends on your answer.
Yes, it seems to be mine. Oh, here is the entry to receive your Gower Street omnibus in younger, happier days. And here on the lock are my initials. The bag is undoubtedly mine. I'm delighted to have it restored to me. It has been a great inconvenience without it all these years.
Miss Prism, more was restored to you than the handbag. I was the baby you placed in it.
You?
Yes, Mother,
Mr. Worthing, I'm unmarried.
Unmarried?
Yes.
Well, I do not deny that this is a serious blow, but who has the right to cast a stone against one who has suffered? Cannot repentance wipe out an act of folly? Why should there be one law for men and another for women? Mother, I forgive you.
Mr. Worthing, there is some error. There is the lady who can tell you who you really are.
Lady Bracknell, I hate to seem inquisitive, but would you kindly inform me who I am?
I must warn you that the news I have to give you will not altogether please you. You are the son of my poor sister, Mrs. Moncrief, and consequently, Algernon's elder brother.
Algy's elder brother? No. Then I do have a brother after all. I always knew I had a brother. Cecily, how could you have ever doubted that I had a brother? Dr. Chasuble, my unfortunate brother. Gwendolen, my unfortunate brother.
My own. But what own are you? What is your Christian name now that you've become someone else?
Oh, good heavens, I've quite forgotten that point. Aunt Augusta, a moment. Miss Prism, at the time you deposited me in the handbag, had I been christened already?
Every luxury that money could buy, including christening, had been lavished upon you by your doting parents.
Then I was christened. That settles it. But what was my given name, please? Let me know the worst.
As the eldest son, you were naturally christened after your father.
Yes, but what was his Christian name?
I recall now that the general was called Earnest. I knew I had some particular reason for disliking the name.
Earnest! I knew from the start you could have no other name.
Gwendolen, at last!
Letitia, at last!
Cecily, at last.
My own Earnest.